Picture a hospital room, bright lights overhead, a bed with adjustable rails, a team of trained professionals standing by with equipment designed specifically for one moment: heart monitors, sterile gloves, pain medication measured down to the milligram. The entire room, every object in it, exists for a single purpose: to make sure that one of the most dangerous things a human body can do goes safely. Now take all of that away. Take away the room. Take away the lights. Take away every single person who knows what they are doing. Replace it with open ground, or a cave, or the edge of a forest, at night, in the dark, with predators that can hear everything. That is where your ancestors were born, every single one of them. And somehow, almost impossibly, enough of them survived to eventually build the hospital room. Here is the thing nobody tells you about human childbirth. It is, by almost any biological measure, the most difficult and dangerous birth process of any land mammal on Earth. Not slightly more difficult, dramatically, almost inexplicably more dangerous. A gorilla gives birth in under 2 hours, usually alone, usually silently, usually without complications. A chimpanzee does the same. Most mammals manage the entire process with no assistance, no community involvement, and no significant mortality risk to the mother. Humans, by contrast, have one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the natural world, and that is true today with all of modern medicine available. Without it, the numbers are staggering. Researchers studying historical and pre-industrial birth mortality estimate that in some prehistoric populations, as many as 1 in 10 births ended in the death of the mother. 1 in 10. Every single time. So why? Why is human birth so catastrophically difficult compared to every other primate? The answer comes down to 2 things that happened at the same time in opposite directions, and the collision between them is what made everything so complicated. The first thing is your brain. Around 2 million years ago, the human brain began expanding rapidly, far faster than any previous point in primate evolution. Bigger brains required bigger skulls to hold them, and bigger skulls meant bigger heads. The second thing is your posture. Around the same time, your ancestors were shifting from moving on 4 limbs to walking upright on 2. Upright walking required a narrower, more bowl-shaped pelvis. A narrower pelvis and a bigger skull are, from a purely mechanical standpoint, a catastrophic combination. The baby's head barely fits through the birth canal at all. In many cases, it only fits by rotating mid-delivery, a process no other primate requires. A chimpanzee infant exits the birth canal face forward, facing the mother, so the mother can reach down and guide the baby out herself. A human infant exits facing backward, facing away from the mother, making self-assisted birth nearly impossible. The mother cannot safely reach down and guide the baby. She needs someone else there. This is what the anthropologist Wenda Trevathan at New Mexico State University has spent decades studying. Her research into what she calls the obstetric dilemma argues that the mechanical difficulty of human birth is so extreme, and has been extreme for so long, that it fundamentally changed human social behavior. The need for assistance during childbirth may be one of the primary evolutionary drivers of human sociality itself. In other words, the reason humans live in tightly bonded cooperative groups, the reason humans are so deeply social compared to other primates, may be at least partly because human birth requires help. Survival depended on never being alone when it mattered most. So who helped? In virtually every pre-modern human society that has ever been studied across every continent and across every period of recorded history, one answer appears consistently: other women, not men, not elders in general, specifically experienced women, usually older, usually mothers themselves, who had knowledge of what to expect and what to do when something went wrong. The anthropologist Karen Rosenberg at the University of Delaware, working alongside Trevathan, analyzed birth practices across dozens of traditional and prehistoric cultures and found that the presence of a birth attendant, what we now call a midwife, appears in essentially every human society ever documented. Not sometimes, always. The role is so universal, so consistent across cultures with zero contact with each other, that Rosenberg and Trevathan argue it is not a cultural invention. It is a biological necessity that every human culture independently recognized, because every human culture faced the same mechanical problem. In practical terms, what did this look like 50,000 years ago? The honest answer is that the direct archaeological evidence is almost non-existent. Childbirth leaves no bones behind. It leaves no tools. It leaves almost nothing that survives thousands of years in the ground. What researchers piece together instead comes from 3 sources: studies of birth practices in contemporary hunter-gatherer societies that have maintained traditional ways of life largely unchanged, analysis of skeletal remains and pelvic anatomy from prehistoric fossils, and the indirect evidence of social structures, group sizes, and community behaviors that show up in the archaeological record. From those sources, a picture emerges. Birth in the ancient world almost certainly happened within the group, not in isolation. The mother would have been surrounded by other women, most likely including at least one who had attended births before. She would have been supported physically, likely held upright or semi-upright during labor, since giving birth in a lying down position, the one most familiar from modern hospital images, is actually a relatively recent invention, driven by the convenience of medical staff, rather than by what is easiest for the mother. Gravity-assisted positions, squatting, kneeling, or supported standing, are far more common in traditional birth practices globally, and there is good reason to believe they were the default for most of human prehistory. Pain was real and it was constant. Human labor is longer than that of any other primate, often lasting many hours and sometimes more than a day. There was nothing to take the edge off except the presence of trusted people, physical support, and whatever plant knowledge the group had accumulated. And some groups had accumulated quite a lot. Ethnobotanical studies of traditional societies around the world have documented dozens of plants used to stimulate contractions, reduce bleeding, ease pain, and assist with the delivery of the placenta. Willow bark, which contains salicin, a compound closely related to aspirin. Blue cohosh and black cohosh, plants used across multiple continents to stimulate uterine contractions. Certain species of raspberry leaf, documented in traditional birth practice across Africa, Asia, and the Americas independently. The knowledge of which plants helped and which ones harmed was not written down. It was carried person to person, mother to daughter, elder to apprentice, across thousands of years of lived experience. It was one of the most practically important bodies of knowledge any human community possessed, and it existed entirely in human memory. Complications happened. They happened often, and without surgical intervention, many of them were fatal. A baby positioned incorrectly, what is now called a breech presentation, where the feet or buttocks enter the birth canal first, rather than the head, was in most prehistoric cases a death sentence for the baby and frequently for the mother as well. A labor that stalled and could not be restarted meant eventual exhaustion, infection, and death. Excessive bleeding after delivery, postpartum hemorrhage, which remains the leading cause of maternal death globally even today, would have killed quickly in a world with no transfusions and no surgical tools. Experienced birth attendants would have developed techniques over generations for managing some of these situations, turning a malpositioned baby from the outside, manually assisting a stalled delivery, using plant preparations to slow bleeding. But there were limits, and those limits were reached regularly. What happened to the babies who survived but whose mothers did not is a question that rarely gets asked and that the evidence can only partly answer. Adoption within the group appears to have been common. Studies of primates and of traditional human societies suggest that motherless infants were typically absorbed by other nursing women or close female relatives. The group had a strong survival interest in keeping every infant alive. A human child requires years of intensive care before it can contribute anything to the group. The investment is enormous. Abandoning it midway through was a loss no small prehistoric band could easily absorb. So the community held the child the same way it held the mother during birth. Not out of sentiment, though sentiment was certainly there, out of the cold logic of survival. There is a broader point embedded in all of this that takes a moment to fully settle. Human birth is so difficult that it essentially cannot be done alone. Not safely, not reliably. The biology of the human body, the head that grew too large, the pelvis that narrowed too much, ensured that from the very beginning of what we would recognize as our species, birth required community. It required trust. It required people willing to be present during one of the most dangerous and vulnerable moments in a human life, not because they were told to, not because there was any formal institution demanding it, but because that is what the group did. That is what survival looked like. The hospital room, when you go back to it now, looks different. The rails on the bed and the monitors and the sterile gloves are not the invention of community around birth. They are just the latest version of it. The most recent tool built to solve the same problem that your ancestors faced every time a child was born into a world with no room for it, no lights above it, and nothing to guarantee it would survive except the hands and the knowledge and the presence of the people who chose to stay. That is what ancient birth looked like. Not a private moment, a collective one. The community that caught you when you arrived is the same community your ancestors built and maintained and protected across hundreds of thousands of years, specifically so that someone would always be there to catch the next one.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button right up there and check out this awesome video too.